Good evening, everyone. My name is Connor Moran. I'm the director of the Wisconsin Book Festival. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are delighted to be hosting Kate Elizabeth Russell for her new book, My Dark Vanessa. And Kate will be joined tonight by Steph Opitz, who is the founding director of the Wordplay Festival. They are a spring festival, and because of all of the circumstances surrounding us, had to move all of their events online. So we're delighted to be partnering with them to present this event together. I want to say a few quick words here at the beginning, just to thank Madison Public Library and the Madison Public Library Foundation. From the moment that we all got sent home, their commitment to bringing all of us free cultural experiences like tonight has been unwavering and has been just profound to me, and I think to many of us, to see how much this matters, not only to us, the viewers at home, but to Madison as a community and to the entire state. So I want to thank all of them and all of the sponsors who make the Wisconsin Book Festival possible. This is something like our 8th or 9th Wisconsin Book Festival event. We did a poetry celebration. We talked to the novelist Stephen Wright and his friend Laura Coates, who is the CNN legal correspondent. And we also did a series of 5 writing seminars for people to kind of hone their home practice while we're all at home. So you can find all of those on the Book Festival Crowdcast link or at wisconsinbookfestival.org. And please check back there. We are hard at work creating new content and finding new great author experiences to bring you throughout the spring. So we will be back. We'll be back here on Thursday night. 6 Madison storytellers will be telling their story of time in quarantine with the podcast Inside Stories, which takes a look at different Madison stories of all types. They're in their 3rd season. So join us same time at 7 o'clock on Thursday night this week for that storytelling. So tonight I mentioned Steph Opitz, the founding director of Wordplay, is here. Steph is, I know that I have a small circle of book festival directors, but among us, Steph is a true rock star. She has worked at the finest places, and then the Texas Book Festival, the Brooklyn Book Festival, the Penn Voices Festival, and now has her own festival up in Minnesota. It typically takes place in May over Mother's Day weekend. And so I encourage all of you to go and see Steph at her festival next year, hopeful. And Kate, to welcome Kate Elizabeth Russell. Kate, the author of My Dark Vanessa. This is her first book. She comes to us by way of Maine and then a bunch of other Midwestern stops on the way to becoming a Madison writer. And so please help me welcome Steph Opitz and Kate Elizabeth Russell. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. I just wanted to say thank you so much to Connor and the Wisconsin Book Festival for having me here tonight with Kate. I'm thrilled to be talking to her about this book, and I'm also thrilled to show that Minnesota and Wisconsin can play nice. I know that there's a lot of sports rivalries, so it's nice when we can have a moment of neighborliness. And I also wanted to just quickly edit Kate's bio because I learned this is not her first book. She actually had a book come out when she was 7 at her school library.
Oh, God.
So I'm excited to talk about your second book.
Great.
And as Connor mentioned, there are Wordplay events happening for the next 3 weeks that you can check out at Loft, wordplay.org, wordplay.loftwordplay.org. Sorry, I can hear my child crying that I'm on this. Sorry if other people can hear him right now. And if you have questions throughout the conversation for Kate, there's a little button right down here that says ask a question, and you can type it in there. Right above that, you'll see that you can buy Kate's book from a room of one's own. So I would definitely encourage you to do that and support Kate and support your indie bookstore. So I'm going to just start out with asking about sort of the impetus behind Vanessa telling this story. I mean, it's a Facebook correspondence prompts this telling. So if you could just talk about like how social media plays a role and why you decided to use that to prompt Vanessa.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I feel, well, I've been a social media user. I feel like I was an early adopter of social media. I've been using social media in some form since I was like 10 or 11 years old, when it was like message forums on AOL. And then I was a blog, like a online journaler, not even a blogger. This is like before blogs, but online journaler starting when I was a teenager. And that's when I really started to write fiction, was in that form. So social media is something that has always been really integral to my writing process. And I've always been really interested in bringing social media into fiction and sort of depicting digital spaces and digital correspondence in fiction that's published in like hard copy rather than just online through hyperlinks and whatnot. So anyway, it was very natural to me, I guess, in that sense, to bring social media into whatever it is that I'm working on. But this story specifically, really, I saw an opening to have social media play a really nuanced role, I guess. So I feel like so often the way the internet and specifically social media is depicted in fiction is, you know, you get the sense that the writer feels sort of stupid doing it. Like they feel almost like sheepish bringing it in. And often the internet is used in a way that depicts it as just like bad or frivolous or, you know, whatever. And I wanted to show a version of the internet and social media that feels more true to me, which is that it's an extension of the way that I communicate. Like there's no real divide between how life plays out online versus not online for me anyway. So in the context of this story, the novel opens with a Facebook post that sort of introduces the opening conflict of the novel. And I had this social media post in early drafts of the book, even before the metoo movement started, when we started seeing sort of this influx of social media posts calling out, you know, sexual abusers or sort of using social media to post testimony of sexual violence. I had seen that sort of emerging as a trend, I guess, though I don't really feel comfortable calling it a trend, but it was something that was increasingly happening even before Me Too. I trace it back at least 5 years prior to 2017. And I remember there was an essay posted on the website ExoJane that isn't around anymore. But this website ExoJane, it had a lot of like beauty blogger stuff. It was geared towards young women. But there was also a section of the website called It Happened to Me. And it was all like personal essays that were really, really intensely personal. And I remember reading one from a survivor of sexual assault who had previously, this story of sexual assault had been previously reported, but she had been anonymous. And the survivor came forward and said in this ExoJane essay, like, I'm this anonymous victim and this is my actual story. And I was really taken by that. And that was in maybe like 2013 that essay was posted, and that stayed in my mind. And so then I'd say around like 2015, when I started really finishing this present day plotline in my novel, I sort of took inspiration from that and had this other former student of the teacher character in the novel come forward and use social media to tell her story. And then Me Too started happening. And that was pretty surreal to see it align in that way. But I'd been paying attention, I guess, to how testimonies of sexual violence and social media had been sort of intersecting.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you bring up the Me Too kind of serendipitous, for lack of a better word. That's not
Right.
the good word, but the timeline kind of matching up. And people might think that, oh, like, look, this book is capitalizing on that, but publishing works so slowly that it seemed like something that, as a sad coincidence, but was always percolating for you, and obviously for many people who are survivors of abuse and assault. So when Me Too started becoming a hashtag that people were using on the internet, where were you at in terms of the publication schedule? So like, did you already have a pub date, and were you like, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I've been talking about?
I was still finishing up the novel,
Okay.
but the novel also served as my PhD dissertation. My PhD is in creative writing, and so your dissertation for a PhD is a creative work, and mine was this book. And so I was on schedule to defend in spring 2018, and in order to do that on time, I had to turn in a finished draft by like mid-January 2018. And so in October 2017, which is when I think of metoo starting, when the stories about Harvey Weinstein were first reported, I was really in the home stretch of finishing up the novel. I was writing like 8 to 10 hours a day, just like had to get it done in order to meet this really hard deadline. And so that's where I was at. And at first I just didn't really know. I mean, the parallel was obvious between my work and this sort of emerging cultural moment. But at first I didn't know how to make sense of it, even though, like I said, the parallel was obvious. But when Me Too first started, it seems to me anyway, so focused on celebrity and so focused on these stories that hinged on fame and really extreme power. And it wasn't until I'd say like a couple months into the movement that I started to really understand the way that Me Too was serving as the impetus for non-famous, ordinary people to look back on past experiences with fresh eyes. And that's when I really sort of saw the way that this cultural moment spoke to this book I was writing in a really real way. So yeah, and then it took some time, like over. So I defended my dissertation and sort of got the PhD, and that was a big achievement. But then my immediate thought was like, well, now I have to get the novel published. And so then I worked on it, tinkered with it, revised it a little bit over that summer when I was querying agents. But then the novel sold in autumn 2018, like right after the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. And so that was like another cultural moment that sort of in a different way spoke to the book. But yeah, timely. I worked on this book for 18 years and never imagined that it would be timely, like, because how could something that had been in my mind for that long ever seem timely? But here we are.
Yeah. I think maybe one thing to just back up, since there are probably some people here who have not yet read this book, and they absolutely should, and they should buy it from A Room of One's Own at the link right here. Can you, in your own words, what is this book about?
Yes. So the sort of elevator pitch, I guess, that I give for it is that it tells the story of Vanessa Wye, who at 32 years old in 2017 learns that the teacher who she believes she had a consensual relationship while she was in high school, beginning when she was 15, she learns that he has been accused of sexual abuse by another former student. And this accusation, it turns her world upside down and causes her to really question that whole relationship, question her role in it. And the novel moves back and forth in time between 2017 and the year 2000, like the early 2000s, I guess, to show how that relationship with the teacher started and how it continued. And then also in 2017, showing the fallout of this accusation from the other former student.
Maybe this would be actually a good time to hear you read a little bit from the book.
Yeah, I have, it's like about a page or so. And so this section that I'll read from is from the 2000 section. So this is Vanessa at 15, and she's sort of interacting with the teacher here, and nothing has quote unquote happened yet, nothing physical anyway. But it's in he's making this sort of slow approach towards her. And I guess maybe I'll explain a little bit after I read why I like to read this specific passage. Right. In the margins of my class notes, I keep track of the details he lets slip about himself. He grew up in Butte, Montana, pronounced like cute. Before going to Harvard at 18, he'd never seen the ocean. He lives in downtown Norumbega, across from the public library. He doesn't like dogs, was mauled by one as a boy. One Tuesday after creative writing club, when Jesse is already out the door and halfway down the hall, Mr. Strane says he has something for me. He opens the bottom drawer of his desk and takes out a book. Is this for class? I ask. No, he says, it's for you. He walks around the desk, puts the book in my hands. Ariel by Sylvia Plath. Have you read her? I shake my head and turn the book over. It's worn with a blue cloth cover. A scrap of paper sticks out between the pages as a makeshift bookmark. She's a bit overdone, Mr. Strane says, but young women love her. I don't know what he means by overdone, but don't want to ask. I flip through the book, flashes of poems, and stop at the bookmarked page. The title, Lady Lazarus, capitalized in bold. Why is this one marked, I ask. Let me show you. Mr. Strane comes up beside me, turns the page. Standing so close to him feels like being swallowed. My head doesn't reach his shoulder. Here, he says, and points to the lines. Out of the ash, I rise with my red hair, and I eat men like air. He says, that reminded me of you. And then he reaches behind me and tugs on my ponytail. I stare at the book as though I'm studying the poem, but the stanzas blur to black smears on a yellow page. I don't know what I'm supposed to do in response. It feels like I should laugh. I wonder if this is flirting, but it can't be. Flirting is supposed to be fun, and this is too heavy for fun. In a quiet voice, Mr. Strane asks, is it okay that it reminded me of you? I lick my lips and lift my shoulders. Sure. Because the last thing I want is to overstep. Overstep. I'm not sure what he means by that either, but the way he gazes down at me stops me from asking any questions. He suddenly seems both embarrassed and hopeful. Like if I told him this wasn't okay, he might start to cry. So I smile and shake my head. You're not, I say. He exhales. Good, he says, moving away from me, back to his desk. Give it a read and let me know what you think. Maybe you'll be inspired to write a poem or two. I like to read that specific passage because I think it's a good example of this tension I wanted to create between the text on the page and Vanessa's voice and the reader, assuming that the reader would sort of see this as grooming or as manipulation, while also sort of forcing the reader to see it from Vanessa's point of view, and which she sees it as this sort of thrilling seduction, right? And it's funny, I remember reading this passage at a pre-publication event, and when I got to that line that he says about Sylvia Plath being overdone, but young women love her, most of the people at the event were like horrified. They were like really mad. And I think they weren't sure if even I, as the writer, understood that to be like, this is sort of infuriating, sort of sexist comment. And it's like, no, that's the point. Like that's part of it. Because I wanted Strane to be a figure who's not just sort of taking advantage of Vanessa in this, in the way that a master manipulator, quote unquote, pedophile would, but also he's an English teacher. And so he's telling her like, this is a literature that's important, or this is a literature that you might like, but undervaluing it at the same time. But yeah, little taste.
Yeah, I think that really addresses well the whole, like, the most challenging thing about the book from my point of view is that there is so much gray area, and that it's so complicated to kind of untangle what he's doing. I mean, and you can see it like in this passage that you just read, that it is a sort of grooming, but then also because you have Vanessa's point of view, you feel really complicated about it. And I want to, the Guardian said in a quote, "The author skillfully reveals the contradictions of a teenager who can be simultaneously sexually mature and extremely vulnerable, highly intelligent, and incapable of protecting herself." And I felt like that was the hardest thing to go through the book, kind of grappling with as a reader. And I'm interested in how you kind of, I mean, I know clearly you spent a long time on this book, but if you could talk about the process of kind of putting that on the page and how you got there.
Yeah. So I started working on the book, and especially with the characters of Vanessa and Strane, when I was really young, when I was like 16 years old. And I was a prolific writer even at that age. So I had an immense amount of material that was like authentically teenage. And when I first started working on this book, and really for a long time, I saw it as I considered it to be a love story. I knew it was dark and full of obsession and even violence, but those things being present in the story didn't necessarily disqualify it as a love story to me. I grew up on Bronte novels. I was obsessed with Phantom of the Opera as a kid. Like darkness and romance were sort of I couldn't separate the two. And so the romanticized way that Vanessa experiences all of this as a teenager was something that was in the writing that I was producing as a teenager. So having that material, even if it didn't show up sort of exactly on the page in the final version of the novel, that was so important to me. And I mean, equally important and maybe inseparable was me clinging to the idea of this being a love story for so long, because that allowed me to write Vanessa's voice, I guess, in a way that was not just authentic or thorough, but also deeply empathetic, deeply empathetic, because really my number one priority when writing this novel was to take Vanessa seriously at every single step of the way, even when it was painful, even when I, as a 30-something-year-old woman, wanted to interject myself and sort of either stop the scene or signal to the reader that I knew that this was manipulative and wrong. I had to force myself to stop and to let her speak for herself. And that was tough. I mean, that was tough till the very end. One of the last big revisions I did on the novel was last minute. I mean, like in December 2017, when I was like up against that hard dissertation deadline, and I switched the verb tense from past to present, because that helped get me out of the text on like a sentence level and let Vanessa take over. So it was tough. But it was just centering her in every single possible way that I could in the book.
Well, and I think that sort of reverence to her is what makes her this sort of like quote unquote challenging or unlikable or whatever people want to say. But it's like, no, this is a full person. This isn't. Unlikability comes when you can see a whole person.
Right.
You mentioned Sylvia Plath and Bronte and Phantom of the Opera and obviously Lolita in the book. I'm wondering, are there other works that you see this in conversation with? Are there?
So one, there are a couple of books. I mean, there's so many, but a couple that were huge, that like kickstarted the writing process in specific ways, I guess. One was this memoir called The Kiss by Katherine Harrison that I read in 2009, I think, that tells the author's experience of having a sexual relationship with her estranged father, who she didn't grow up with, but, you know, met once when she was a kid and then reconnected with when she was 20. And it's a really challenging piece of writing. But it's I think considered like a canonical memoir now. But when it was published in 1997, 1998, she was treated terribly the author. I mean, the reviews were so unfair, and tore her apart in really inappropriate ways, and just attacked her and attacked the book, and the goalposts were constantly moving. I studied the way that memoir specifically was received critically during my PhD. So that was really formative for me, both the memoir as this piece of writing that dealt with sexual abuse and consent and gray area in this really beautiful way, but also the way that the public responded to it. There was another memoir published in 2011 called Tiger, Tiger by Margot Fragroso that was about the author's experience of being groomed and sexually abused by a man, starting when she was like 7 years old, and the relationship went on until she was 21. And that memoir was also a beautiful piece of writing, but it was attacked sort of mercilessly when it was published in 2011. So I feel like reading those and studying the way that they were received, and those were both like big books that got a lot of attention, prepared me for the experience of publishing a narrative of sexual abuse. Even though my book is a novel, I sort of anticipated a certain kind of response to the subject matter, because it does dwell in these gray areas so much. But otherwise, yeah, Lolita, I consider it in conversation with absolutely and Pale Fire, where the title comes from. And also some lesser known works. There's a short story called Lawns by the writer Mona Simpson, who wrote the novel Like Anywhere But Here. The short story Lawns, it was published in the 80s in the Iowa Review, and it tells the story of a freshman college student who's dealing with going away to school and trying to separate herself from her sexually abusive father. And that character in that story is, I think of as like a proto Vanessa. They're so similar, even though the sexual abuse happening is really different. It's very similar in sort of the toughness of these young women and their experiences of not seeing themselves as victims, not because they don't see room for themselves in that identity, I guess. So yeah, those are a few. But also the music of Fiona Apple and Kate Bush, and the influences are very wide, I guess.
Vanessa seemed very alone throughout the book. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you had any thoughts about allyship and how she could have been, how people in her life did or did not kind of help her when she was going through this.
Yeah, it's a tough thing. And yeah, she is alone. I think for Vanessa, the first time that she feels able to confide in anyone is with her therapist when she's 32. And the reason why she feels that way is because her therapist, Ruby, doesn't dismiss the idea of Vanessa's agency. Like Ruby is very careful to frame her questions in the way that they talk about this relationship that Vanessa had with the teacher, that doesn't dismiss Vanessa's experience. Whereas really everyone else who Vanessa confides in, either deliberately or inadvertently through the novel, everyone else sort of tries to tell her, like, this is what you experience. Like what you're saying you experienced is wrong. You actually were abused, or you should come forward publicly. Like, you should do this. This is what you should do. And that those responses throughout the course of her life just make her dig her heels in deeper. I think partly because she's a stubborn character, but also because she doesn't feel, I think, heard or taken seriously. And I know from my experience just writing the book, the only way that I was able to be successful, I think, in writing her point of view was to take her seriously. So I think sometimes that can be overlooked because it's frustrating. And Vanessa, she's a difficult character. She's a frustrating character, and I know a lot of readers might read the book and readers say like, oh, I want to reach in and shake her, I want to slap her, and it's like, that would not do any good. Like, it's an understandable reaction. But if we are to read a book like this and take lessons from it that might carry on into our own lives, I think the best thing you can do is to listen and to take someone's lived experience seriously, even if it's difficult, or especially if it's difficult, because that's the entry point. That's the only way to forge a real connection.
Did you, by the way, I'm going to start asking audience questions pretty soon here. So if folks have them, feel free to type them in. Did you have a goal that you wanted readers to walk away feeling, thinking after they read this book?
Yeah, I mean, nothing specific, I'd say. I really wanted readers to walk away from the book wanting to talk about it, wanting to discuss it and unpack it. My dream is for it to be like analyzed in an academic setting too, because, I spent most of my adult life in graduate school. But, I wanted the reader to come away with more questions than answers, whatever those questions might be, because I know something that I felt a lot while metoo was going on, when I was sort of reading these conversations that were happening on social media, I was so struck by the way that people come into this topic at different points. I remember these moments of feeling frustration. Like, why don't people get it? Why are these, concepts so difficult for other people to understand? It's like, well, I've spent, my adult life questioning, circling around these questions and studying them and writing them out. And not everyone has done that. And so I wanted to write a novel that, no matter what point in the sort of journey, I guess, of thinking about sexual violence or thinking about consent, thinking about coercion, no matter where you are, whether you've spent, years and years studying it or living it, experiencing it, or if you really haven't read anything that deals with these topics before, there's something to take away from this book. So leaving it open-ended, I guess, was really important for me.
Speaking of questions, I'm going to ask an audience. This is from Lynn Ansfield. She said, what was the toughest question you faced when you defended your novel for your PhD?
Oh God, I don't know if I can remember anything specific. I feel like I just block it out. It's all a blur. I don't know. I'm not I mean, I think one question, and I assume this was asked during my PhD defense, but it's certainly been asked since, is like, what new thing are you contributing? Not just to certain narratives of sexual abuse, but the trope itself, I guess, of a younger woman and an older man, especially a student-teacher relationship, especially when the teacher's an English teacher, and maybe especially when it takes place at a boarding school in New England. There's a sense of, oh, it's been done before. You're not traversing new ground here. I remember during my MFA, which I got in my 20s, one of my professors said, like, you're not doing anything new here. So what you have to do is become a master of the trope, meaning like you have to read everything that deals with these similar relationship dynamics and sort of internalize them and make sure that you're doing something new. So I took that seriously, and yeah. While at the same time trying to acknowledge that this is familiar territory and that readers might, trying to play with their expectations a little bit.
What type of research this question's coming from Amber. What type of research did you do when writing about the student-teacher relationship?
And just reading a lot, I think, but also I was in school for a really long time. I studied creative writing as an undergraduate, and then went straight into an MFA program and eventually a PhD. So I had a lot of experience as a student, in sort of English literature classrooms and writing classrooms. But I also had a lot of experience as a teacher. I taught all through my MFA and my PhD, and during my PhD, one of my exam topics was on creative writing pedagogy, which is like the theory of teaching. And it was then I feel that I really started to think about the writing and literature classroom as a space where that can become especially like emotionally charged, because you have a situation where as a teacher, you're telling students like, this is the literature that's important. These are the stories that matter. And you need to read these and engage with them on an emotional level and write about them and expose some level of vulnerability, and then turn in this writing to me. And I'm the only one who will read it. And I'm going to give you comments and assign you a grade. Like, there's an immense amount of power that can be abused there that we sort of take for granted. And it was by studying teaching in a really critical way that I was able to, I don't know, I guess bring that critical viewpoint into the book and allow me to, I don't know, maybe to step into Strane's shoes a little bit, which was uncomfortable, like not something that I necessarily wanted to do, but I feel like the book is a lot stronger because of that. And the whole experience too, I think made me a much better teacher. Not that I'm teaching now, but maybe someday again, I will start.
Okay, this question is from Emily Erickson. You wrote this over such a long period of time. How did you maintain your sanity when immersing yourself in a character like Strane and even Vanessa? There's so much that's unhealthy in each of them and in their dynamic. At the same time, your writing is so deeply empathetic to both characters.
Yeah, I did work on it for such a long time, and I wrote other stuff in between, especially when I was in the creative writing programs, so taking workshops, and I had to be writing like short stories for classes. So I did have breaks from it, but I always write about dark stuff. I'm just drawn to that. I'm mentally, at least, my psychology is kind of intense, but at the same time, I'm kind of a goofy person, like off the page. Like my husband and I just like laugh like 75% of the time. I have a great life. Like it has always been easy for me to sort of shift gears when the writing is getting really intense. I know I can always sort of step away from it and find joy elsewhere. But at the same time, it was hard. It was hard, especially when there were long stretches of time that I was working on, especially difficult scenes. There were some days where at the end of the day, I felt physically exhausted, as though I'd, run, miles and miles all day. Like my body was actually sore when all I'd been doing was sitting in a chair. It's just writing. When you're working with really difficult material, can sometimes take it out of you and make you feel dead dog tired. So I did feel that a lot.
Did you have any sort of like ritual when you'd have a day like that to be like, okay, I'm lighting a candle or doing something?
I'm a big candle advocate. And yeah, just, doing whatever you need to unwind. But one thing that I would do a lot, either to sort of unwind or to get my mind sort of generating and thinking, is walking my dog. And so that was always really, really important to me. And then I brought that in a little bit at the end of the book when I wasn't quite sure what I wanted the very, very final moments of the book to be. But I don't want to spoil anything, but a dog does make an appearance in a way that I hope comes across as somewhat hopeful at the end.
So this question comes from Nikki Tverick. I really appreciate the many smaller situations where Vanessa sees or experiences the way in which women are treated as less than, or with violence or hysterical, or as sexual objects. Such situations in the hotel lobby, with school administrators, as she loses herself at bars, etc., woven in throughout. Was that always part of the book, or were those included as you considered the Me Too movement?
Mm-hmm. No, they were always there. But I feel like maybe they got teased out a little bit more, not necessarily because of Me Too, but just exploring this theme, because I really, really wanted the reader to come away from the book sort of with the impression, I guess, that Strane isn't working in a vacuum. Like this abuse that he's sort of inflicting on Vanessa, he's doing it, but this is all happening in a culture that normalizes abuses of power, that normalizes the sexualization of teenage girls. And so I wanted those moments to speak to the sort of the culture at large and how sort of banal this type of objectification or even violence is. And schools are a setting where that happens all the time, but also hotels certainly are. I worked in hotels when I was younger. My sister worked in hotels. My mom worked in hotels in Maine, where I grew up. It's a state that depends on tourism. And so there are a lot of hotel jobs, and it's sort of common to spend some summers there, at least working there. And yeah, it's a really difficult workplace in a lot of ways, because you're sort of expected to put up with a really high level of sexual harassment, just no matter what your job is, whatever your position is at the hotel. And for housekeepers, especially who are going up into guest rooms, there's a high rate of actual sexual assault, and often you're expected just to deal with it.
This question comes from Amy. Being a writer of fiction, what did you think of the American Dirt controversy, and does it make you nervous about writing fiction?
No, it doesn't make me nervous. It doesn't make me nervous. I think, I mean, it's complicated. Inevitably, it is complicated, and it only gets more complicated when, the question of what you are supposed to write about is always there. I think even before publication comes into the picture, but just like when you're sitting down and as a writer and deciding what to write. But then it gets even more intense and complicated when it becomes a piece of writing that's going to get published and people are getting paid, and it sort of enters into this capitalist space. So yeah, but at the same time, I don't know how valid my opinion is, despite being in this position where I have this book out, because I don't know that much about the publication or the publishing industry. I know my experience, but at the same time, I know my experience has been an outlier as far as debut novelists go. And I know my publication team, but that's it. Before my book was published, I had never been to New York. I didn't know anyone who worked in publishing. And so I think when people who are well-versed in the publication industry and who have been through experiences where their work has been sidelined, I think we should take those experiences seriously and view them in the context of the publishing industry as a whole, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was a absolutely important conversation to be had, and I hope it continues even when things go back to normal post-COVID.
Yeah. This question comes from Terry White. Did you write the chapters in the order they exist in the book, or did you play around with moving the different plot points around?
Yeah, I didn't write it in order. The 2000, like the teenage Vanessa sections, were written for the most part long ago. Like some of those scenes are almost like decades old, I want to say, and they'd been worked over and over again, but their origins were long time ago. But the present day plot line, that was the last section of the book that I wrote. And it didn't, I couldn't switch back and forth. It was too difficult for me because for me anyway, I don't know how, readers might view this, but to me, the voices of 32-year-old Vanessa and teenage Vanessa are very different. And so it would have been just too difficult for me to switch back and forth in the way that it's read. It wasn't until the book was, really sort of a cohesive whole that I was able to edit it all the way through. Otherwise I had to focus on one or the other, even when I was like revising or even line editing, I'd say.
This question comes from Sarah Sassafras Skoniki. I'm sorry, I'm butchering last names. I appreciate the way you write about Maine. Your sensory descriptions transported me there. The authenticity and sense of place in your writing was a thrill to read. Did you consciously choose to make Maine a character, one of your characters when you wrote this book?
That's such a good question. Yeah, I would say I did. You know, it's a weird thing growing up in Maine as an aspiring writer, maybe especially growing up in Bangor, because you read so much in school, inevitably, of literature that's set in Maine. And then also growing up in Bangor, you have Stephen King, who's living in town. And so you have this sort of example of someone who has taken the city of Bangor, which if you grow up there, you think of it as like the end of the earth, like so boring, like the most, you know, kind of, or at least I kind of hated it when I was growing up because I felt like I was in the middle of nowhere and just wanted to get out. But you saw, you know, Stephen King taking this town that you think of as so boring, and he turns it into this place where people from all over the world would come there just to like look at the, you know, the water tower because it showed up in one of his books. And so I feel like that was kind of formative for me, seeing the power of taking a place and transforming it through fiction and making it sort of fascinating to the world at large. And so it's interesting, like I grew up never doubting Maine as a worthwhile setting for literature, I guess. But, but at the same time, I felt like I was, I had to write about Maine in a way that like other writers had written about Maine, where, you know, sort of like E.B. White, you know, writing about the nature of Maine lakes and the Maine woods and whatnot. And that wasn't, you know, I grew up in the middle of the woods in Maine, and I understood that landscape in a way that was very particular to me. I didn't know the names of the trees, but I knew how the bark felt under my fingernails, you know? And so it took me a long time to really understand that I could write about Maine the way that I experienced it and that I knew it. And I didn't need to know the names of all the trees. I didn't need to write like E.B. White. I could write about it like me, where, you know, that was true to my lived experience. But yeah, setting fiction in Maine is really important to me. I think everything I write, every book I write is going to be set in Maine. It's just, it's in me, especially because I don't live there anymore. You know, you need the distance.
This question is from Paula Schroeder. It's a question about sort of, well, I'll just say exactly what it says. How do you feel about teen girls reading the book?
Yeah, I've gotten this question a couple of times, and it's, you know, I didn't ever think about teenage readers while I was writing it. Like, this is an adult novel written for adult readers, and I never read YA literature when I was a kid. I went straight into, you know, sort of reading my mom's novels that were lying around as soon as I could like pick them up and grasp them at like age 11 or so. And I don't really read YA fiction as an adult, so I don't know. I'm not very knowledgeable about what makes a book YA and what the sort of limits are, or the rules are. But I would hope that teenage girls reading the novel would be able to empathize with Vanessa and maybe, you know, get something out of reading the experience of a teen girl character who is complicated and a fully depicted as a full human being. That's what I hope. But as far as like whether the content is appropriate or not, I have no idea, because, you know, people are different. As a teenager, I would have read this book and internalized it in a way that I think would have been really helpful and healthy. But that's just my experience, and I don't have kids of my own and don't plan on it. So I don't know. I don't know about children. I don't
know. I'm just going through the rest of the audience questions. I think a lot of them you've addressed already. And while I'm scanning them, I just want to put in another plug for people to click the link and buy Kate's book.
Yes. Right.
It's right. Yeah, right there. Okay. This question comes from Terry. Since the ending is so open-ended, and Vanessa's narrative so complicated.
It's just the me show.
Am I back?
Oh yeah.
Back.
Okay,
Never mind.
sorry. I don't know what I just clicked, but it's fun to learn technology live. Okay, so this question is, what's your writing process? Daily, kitchen table, laptop, paper? What are you currently working on? So it's a lot of questions, but how do you write and what are you writing?
Yeah, it really depends. I write every day, but my sort of definition of what encompasses writing, I think, is really generous. Like sometimes it's just writing an Instagram post. I try to be really thoughtful with those, and or it's just like jotting down some stuff in the notes app in my phone. I still consider that writing. And I also try to view my writing process in a way that, like, I understand that it's cyclical, and sometimes I'll be in a stretch where it's coming out and I can sit down every day and get scenes down and work for several hours at a time, and there'll be other stretches where I can't do it. It's not going to come, and I just have faith that it's always going to come back, like the ability to sit down and really get words on the page. Like it's not going anywhere. It's just I need to recharge for however long. And sometimes that's months. Sometimes I need to take really long breaks, but that's okay. Right now I do feel, when the sort of staying shelter in place quarantine first happened, there were like a couple of weeks at least of real adjustment and just being sort of like stunned, I feel like, and having to spend a lot of time on the couch and not get a lot done. But now I feel like I'm kind of getting used to it, and I'm able to start thinking creatively again. So I've been working on just sort of like low stakes pieces. I've been writing a piece about Fiona Apple right now that I'm just going to like post on my website, without an editor or anything. That's being really helpful. And I am slowly but surely working on a new project. I'm too superstitious to call it a book, though that obviously is the goal. And I'm just getting ideas down as they come to me and trying not to put too much pressure on myself. Like that is the best way that I can describe my writing process. I just try to follow whatever I want to do. And maybe that's why my book took 18 years to write, but that's what works for me. If I start making myself feel bad about not being quote unquote productive, it kills it. It kills it. So I try to be really gentle and like, sort of cultivate creativity rather than try to force it.
Do you have a book that you would recommend people read right now? Or you have any books that you're loving or that you love to recommend?
Yeah, I'm not really reading a huge amount right now. I just read the memoir, Things We Didn't Talk About When I Was a Girl. That was incredible. I can't remember the author's name. It was published through Tin House, I think, last year. Incredible. And also Chanel Miller's memoir, Know My Name, just sort of keeping in the theme of sexual violence. I also read a couple of arcs that I think they're still coming out like over the summer, but I know a lot of publication dates have been pushed back. One is called oh my God, I can't remember the author. She's incredible. Her name is Nicola May Goldberg. And it's this psychological thriller published by Bloomsbury that's coming out. Nicola May Bloomberg. I can't believe I can't remember the name of the novel. But it's incredible. Every sentence is gorgeous. It's a thriller, but it doesn't really read like one. It reads like literary fiction. And then also a novel coming out from FSG, I think in August, called Talking Animals by Joni Murphy that takes place in New York City, but it's populated by animals instead of people. Animals working like the protagonist is an alpaca who works at City Hall. It's an incredible critique of capitalism. It's like nothing else I've ever read, really. Kind of like Animal Farm, but like backwards. It's so amazing. So amazing. And it has like the best cover of 2020. I swear to God. That's Talking Animals by Joni Murphy.
Well, those are some great recommendations. Just one last kind of question. So obviously you would have been on book tour right now. How is it feeling to do these virtual events instead of being in person at all of these bookstores? And
yeah, I mean, I was looking forward to doing, you know, some kind of like book tour, live events, obviously, like, but at the same time, I get really overwhelmed by meeting a lot of people, and I'm really comfortable using social media. I'm really comfortable online and doing all this. So in a way, it's like, oh, I like it. I like being home and not having to travel. So it's not the worst thing for me. But yeah, I feel for other authors who were really, really, you know, looking forward to traveling and doing the book tour stuff. It's disappointing for me, but I can deal with it. It's easy to keep perspective now too. Because it could be so much worse. Yeah.
Well, Kate, thank you so much for giving us this time and answering your questions and writing such a thoughtful, powerful book. It was a pleasure to read and to be able, well, I'm not sure I'd say it was a pleasure to read, but it was an amazing book. And it's so great to be able to use this forum to talk with you. And thank you so much to the Wisconsin Book Festival, to Connor and your team. Like, it's been really great to be a part of this. And if you'd like to stay in tune with anything that's going on with the Loft Wordplay, it's loftwordplay.org. We have events like a couple every day for the next 3 weeks. So tune in and check that out. And again, buy the book. Buy the book.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Connor.
Thank you, Steph. I think this is in the chat here, this is the only way I can actually get a round of applause is with clapping emojis. That's really all I can do. We can give you a round of applause. Kate, thank you so much. Thank you for being here tonight. I know it's not a bookstore that's near and dear to my heart. Oh, look at Sarah's got all the clapping emojis. And Steph, thank you so much. I can only imagine and may have to what it's like to do a digital festival. So thank you so much for being here. And I don't know if anybody said this, but please buy the book. There's a link at the bottom of the yeah, thanks so much. It's so great. Also, I will just say I am able to see all of the people who are here. We had more than 100 people attend tonight, which is fantastic. A lot of book festival regulars, a lot of old friends. Jackie Polzine, I haven't seen you in 8 years, but you live in Minnesota, so maybe that's how you got here. But yeah, it's just it's great, and thank you to Steph and Kate for bringing everyone together tonight around this wonderful book. Thanks so much. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye.